in front of your mic. There, that's it.
Nathan, I don't know why I don't have your.
I emailed it to you about 1:30 or 1 o'clock.
Someone who doesn't know Nathan could make one up.
Yeah, that's true. I'll resend right now. Hold on.
Or you could introduce yourself.
True. It's very short. Yeah, Paul, I just resent it.
Okay. Sometimes it takes a couple of minutes. Here we are. Oh, that's short. I could have made it up. Nathan Leslie is the author of 12 books of fiction and 1 collection of poetry. His latest collection of stories is A Fly in the Ointment. It's a great cover, by the way. He has also served as co-editor or series editor of 8 additional books, including Best of the Web and Best Small Fictions. Check out his work at nathanleslie.net. You're up, Nathan.
Okay. I wasn't sure if I was reading first or not. About 10 minutes, correct, Paul? Okay. All right. So welcome, everybody. I'm really honored to be a part of this reading. Thank you all for tuning in, and I look forward to hearing you read as well. So this is a collection of stories. So it's not really flash. I don't think there are any stories in here that would qualify as flash, really. They're short stories, sort of mid-range in length, some longer. This is one of the shorter ones, which I really enjoy reading. And I guess it was inspired by those signs that you see outside of churches that I always find so pithy and interesting. With, you know, the signs would have basically advice, spiritual advice or common everyday advice. And this particular story was published a few years ago in Swamp Ape Review. You know, that one is sort of a funky little literary magazine. And it has a kind of a mouthful of a title called Glory Be to Those Who Choose the Light. When Mildred Fenister Smith passed, we knew we rested on uncertain ground. Miss Mildred had been our sign lady for as long as anybody could remember, and our memory trickled back to the edge of time. Miss Mildred was 93 at least. Some say she was older, and that even she couldn't herself pin it exactly. She wrote a sign the week she passed. As the parish assistant, I was slated to handle the manual manipulation of the sign proper, but that was the easy part. The Reverend called me God's own assistant, but the sign was my pleasure. It was just maneuvering letters around is all. Miss Mildred heard the spirit and provided the transcription. Thankfully, Miss Mildred passed in her sleep. They say that's the best way to go, and if anyone deserves the best way, it was Miss Mildred. What with her handmade pot holders in the shape and resemblance of acorn squash, her visits to sickly children, and benevolence to the poor in our parish. She truly was a blessing upon us. The clothes on your back or more than you need, in quotations. We carried forth much discussion in the parish at large and amongst the reverend and volunteers who assisted him in some capacity. Who would replace the utterly irreplaceable? Who could inscribe an inspired sign? Who had the ear? We pondered possibilities for weeks, while the Reverend recycled Miss Mildred's recent chestnuts to fill the void. Jesus is our lifeboat. The cross is not mere wall decoration. God's house is never for sale. The parish did not mind a reprise, but after several weeks of mourning, they were hungry for the new and unseen breath from above. They wanted inspiration. The sign had become a community guiding light, and many among the parish considered themselves followers of it, and as such, it bore almost as much meaning to them as the weekly sermon. Some felt it was the beacon. Jim Nettles was thought by some among the parish to be a natural replacement for Miss Mildred, but he was acrimonious in personality and political, and some thought he would abuse his given powers. Mary Ryson was also considered, but some among the parish fretted over her steadfastness or lack thereof, and Miss Mary had health problems herself. Finally, it was decided to hold a contest. The best sign would result in the position. We decided to leave it open to pure inspiration and go from there. Over 107 entries were received from our blessed town of 987. The judges consisted of the Reverend, Bill Bullis, Pam Voller, Lisa Seethan, and Michael Balkin. I assisted. I've been around a long time, and I didn't have much else to focus upon since my husband passed several years ago. After eliminating the nonsensical and prosaic, we decided on the author of The Clothes on Your Back. This struck the judges as witty and poignant, relatable and mysterious, but not too mysterious. Enough for the layperson. The author, shockingly, was Nettie Heslin. In quotes here, I am lost, forgotten, and without the wings of youth. Nettie Heslin, Miss Voller said, that old oddity. She cannot by any means or ways be our sign lady. She's nuts. She talks to the clouds and eats beetles for breakfast. Fair is fair, is it not? The Reverend said. We cannot go back on our word, not in this church. She may be a pagan even, Miss Voller continued. The Reverend shrugged his shoulders stoically. God speaks through her pen clearly. Perhaps he ignores the vessel. That is enough for us. And so it began. You are only voiceless if you fail to listen. Our town of Midgeville is a pleasant enough place, but nobody ever leaves, which gave us for many years a rather parochial reputation. Most likely we were deserving of such standing. The residents were often born and bred and died within the confines of the town, without scarcely seeing so much as the state capital. Some residents are afraid to cross the town line and rarely, if ever, do so. I have visited Lincoln County twice and Wilson County 3 times. I am, as a result, considered worldly. Nettie Heslin was one such homebody, though. However, she took it to a rare extreme, which made others in the parish queasy. Only 5 or 6, little Timmy Crossland is questionable, members of the parish had even seen Miss Nettie in the flesh, since she doesn't leave her property. Nettie had a young lady, one Jillian Wilton, who did her weekly shopping. Sadly, Nettie had no family to speak of. She only saw the light of day in the backyard and cultivated a weakness for gardening by legend. However, she kept her hedges high and somewhat unruly. That was known. I was instructed to make her acquaintance, as I would be the go-between. The parish was only asking for one single sentence from her a week, yet the prestige of the position warranted at least a courtesy face-to-face. Imagine a field of poppies with fangs. I knocked on the door expecting strange shuffling behavior and avoidance, but instead it snapped open. Before me stood Miss Nettie in a brilliant blue robe adorned with orange birds. Was it silk? Her hair snaked around her neck in an odd pattern, covering the entirety of her neck and coalescing in front of her in a wide horsebrush array. It looked quite uncomfortable. She gesticulated wildly as she spoke, guiding me to the divan, and then she clicked a heavily lidded lamp, blowing dust from the bulb self-consciously. I don't often receive visitors, as you may observe. Her hands continued their desolate movements. I thought she may have been simultaneously translating into sign language for an invisible audience of her own making. Her fingers were that vigorous. I've heard this, I said. I just came to discover the source of your beautiful words. She pointed upwards with both index fingers. I am just a mere go-between. I listen and let my pen capture what the Lord distributes. She talked nonstop about her routines, her gardening, the books she was perusing, the villanelle she composed in her mind, the photography she takes with only the assistance of her eyelids. I expected to find a grouching hermit. Instead, I found a woman with immense and seemingly boundless creative energy. Then she showed me her paintings, wild, effervescent, swirling patterns of orange and blue and black and purple like airplane contrails through a morning sunrise. Sometimes he speaks to me with words, she said. Sometimes he speaks to me in images. I have to be ready. The spirit within is the spirit without. The spirit within is the spirit without within. The parishioners were at first entranced. When she says without, she means Jesus before Gethsemane. That is clear, Mr. Roberts said. I think it refers to Job, Miss Rebecca said. I think it is all of us, the common sinner, Miss Voller said. What about you are only voiceless, Mr. Robert asked. Who is voiceless and who should they listen to, Miss Voller asked. God himself, who else, Miss Rebecca replied. It's a riddle, Miss Voller said, a twisted little nugget. We couldn't tell if this was a compliment or not. The way her voice hung on little made it sound demonic somehow, or perhaps this was my false and contorted impression. They found her signs enigmatic, but perhaps a shade too much so, perhaps too odd, not what they expected. They wanted the sign to offer them something from which they could learn. Some grumbled, complaining that Miss Mildred's signs were for everyone. Miss Nettie's signs seemed for the close reader, obtuse and far afield. The cancer that lies dormant in your heart can be deferred. By what? By whom? Help us out, the Reverend said. Main Street Baptist gained 20 last Sunday. We lost a few. Main Street Baptist was interloper, having started just 20 years ago and stolen countless budding parishioners with their fire and brimstone. We suspected a corporation behind their signs, Holy Land Inc. It was no accident. They ran and operated the vast majority of churches in our state, including Main Street Baptist, though they kept the author of their signage in the dark. It was direct and plain, a counterpoint to Miss Nettie's vagaries. The Reverend enjoyed the artistry of Miss Nettie's messages, but he simply hoped the cryptic messages would not drive more parishioners into the arms of our bitter rival. Give us something we can use, he said. I have enough on my plate at this juncture. Sustenance is the world's temptation. I mentioned this to Miss Nettie, but her eyes stared holes through me. I can't steer these messages, she said. They steer me. I liked her. My mother was lost to me at a young age, and I had a weakness for the wisdom of older ladies. Plus, Miss Nettie was authentic, odd, but true. I respected the Reverend also, but his motivation was often directed outward towards strategy and the best interests of the community. I suspected he had eyes to move on. I witnessed him several times glancing through the classified section with interest. Sustenance is the world's temptation. I watched the Reverend read it, ticking each word one by one, savoring the resonance. He stared at the sign, at the gladiolas in front of it. He shook his head with a tinge of defeat. I should go make the acquaintance of this woman. The path to righteousness is littered with broken-hearted sinners. I took him there. Miss Nettie was in especially rare form, arms and hands flailing and whipping about as she spoke. She served iced tea and orange wedges and little oatmeal cookies. The Reverend averted his eyes from her paintings. Can you do me a personal favor? The Reverend kept his hands clasped down on his lap as if he were containing wild rodents. Every hair on his head was perfectly arranged, a wax statue of himself. I can certainly try, she said. Can you just include the words Jesus or heaven in your phrasings more often? It does not have to be all the time, just on occasion. We need efficiency, and we need to make sure we bring it all back home, if you catch my drift. Miss Nettie sunk into her flailing explanation about being the translator of God's statements offering that the words come directly from him, untranslated. After 10 minutes of this, sensing an opportunity, I stated, perhaps we could just add that in an afterwards. It's implicit anyway. What does implicit mean? The Reverend asked. What do you mean afterwards? This isn't that difficult. It's already in there. What is? We just tack God onto the message board. It's about him. It's from him, Miss Nettie said. This comes direct. I nodded, and Miss Nettie did a kind of half gesticulation, half shrug, and looked off into the wall. That was good enough for the Reverend, perhaps. The spirit within Jesus is the spirit without within, he said, as if we were walking back to the car. Sorry, as we were walking back to the car. What does that mean? I'm not sure, but it sounds better with Jesus in it. He shook his head twice. I knew what that meant. Heaven is a place on earth. I couldn't bear to tell Miss Nettie that she had been replaced. She still sent her messages from God, but we didn't post them. We had a computer for that. Attendance was still down and trending down, the Reverend said. We need holy behinds in the pews. The ones who hadn't died or moved on. I missed Henry so. We lived a good, simple life, and he would have had the right advice for the situation. I had to return to our photographs for consolation. Miss Nettie's surreal compositions with Jesus tacked on, the ones we didn't run, seemed even stranger than her original compositions. We of the people are within the people, and the Spirit sings, and Jesus. It is a lonely man who dances with others, says God. The highway of thieves and gamblers glistens with the Spirit underneath, and because of the corruption, says God. I continued to drive over every Monday morning to pick up her latest lines as she refrained from using the phone or a computer. We chatted and I went on my way. I was forced to tell her that we weren't using them. I was swimming in the corn on Friday, and it was as if he was inside the stalks. It is difficult to describe. He was sprinkled everywhere, speaking to me. How was I supposed to just walk away? For a year and 2 months, I visited her every Monday. She rarely asked about the Reverend, the parish, or anything else. She just handed me 1 or 2 sentences. I usually fall asleep in church, she told me once, but I moved. I decided that in the time I had left, I needed a larger scope. I heard from Miss Crystal that Miss Nettie passed in the cornfield about 9 months later. Stroke or brain hemorrhage, she suspected, not sure which. According to her, Miss Nettie became lost in the stalks and began grasping them for a way out. Yet the field was large, and as a result of her struggles, Miss Nettie lost her way and stumbled. She had a smile on her face, one brimming with inspiration, I had no doubt. The Reverend bought an updated computer program to automatically churn out randomized weekly sayings as needed. He kept the computer in the basement by the secondary freezer and the beverage fridge. The fridge was always stocked with Pepsi, Sprite, and Coke, all ice cold. Thanks.
Oh, Paul, excuse me. Tommy's not coming. He just messaged me. He had something come up with his kids, so he's not going to be able to make it. Paul, do we have the next reader?
Your mic's not on, Paul, or you need to be directly in front of the mic.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't hear you.
How about now?
Okay.
Now's good.
Okay, I'm gonna read your bio again. All right. Did you hear that? I feel like I'm in a room with all my aunts. Francine Witt is a poet, flash fiction writer, and playwright. She has stories in the upcoming Best Small Fictions and Flash Fiction America. Her flash fiction books include the newly published Just Outside the Tunnel of Love and Dressed All Wrong for This. And her poetry books include Cafe Crazy and The Theory of Flesh. She recently launched Francine Witt pop-up prompts, Zoom sessions that offer prompts and exercises. She's the flash fiction editor for Flash Boulevard and the South Florida Poetry Journal. Follow her on Twitter at Francine Witt or visit her new website, francinewitt.com, and she lives in New York City.
Thank you, Paul. And again, nice to have you back at the helm. So I'm going to read the story that was in the Best Small Fictions 22 that Nathan actually chose. So kind of reading it in his honor. And it's called This Isn't Anything. When Burley comes home late every night, I tell myself he's busy. He tells me that too, but I believe it more when I say it. Now, I do understand he's been busy before, but this is a busy with a smell on it. This particular night, it's 9 p.m. exactly. He comes in all fed, even though I made pot roast. The pot roast that burned while I waited for him, the flat char of it still coating the air. Burley whooshes himself into the shower, careful to take off his jeans and shirt and ball them into a wad. Best to leave those, he says. I stop for gas and some jerk spilled coffee all over me. I wait till the shower is running to give his shirt a good sniff. Not a hint of coffee anywhere. Nothing is wet. And then I go for his jeans. In the pocket, a matchbook, red with the black outline of two lovers, two cocktail glasses about to clink. After the shower and him toweling himself off, what a day, and I should have called. I hold up the matchbook. Oh, this, he says, this isn't anything. Guy at work was passing them out. New place opened down the street. Burley says, work's going to be a bear this week, just so I know. He likes to compare everything to animals. Guys at work are a bunch of donkeys. Me, I'm a cute little cat. And I am, curled up and patient like my mother taught me to be. This is what men like, she said, and really, I didn't mind, although Burley forgets sometimes that a cat needs attention. A tickle on the back of its neck, a rake of fingers through the hair. Later in bed, I nuzzle up kitten-like. He turns on his side. Tired is all he says. I whisper, hey, I'd like to go to that matchbook place with you, have drinks like we used to. I say this as his breath becomes even with sleep. I wobble his shoulder and say it again, but he doesn't move. He is a lost mountain to me now. Something that isn't hunger exactly gets me on my feet and into the fridge. I pull out the leftover pot roast, burnt as it is. I kitten my face into it, nuzzle and nibble and suck. Soon I go from tame little cat to feral. I crouch down on the floor and start gnawing like a lion on one of those nature shows I watch when Burley isn't home. And then, without a sound, Burley just like that in the doorway, the swell of the fluorescent light overhead, sudden and sharp. Burley leans over and struggles the pot roast away from my mouth, a look on his face like he caught me kissing another man. He lifts me to my feet. He flinches as my fingernails dig into his shoulders. Any harder, and there would be blood. What's wrong with you? He says with a look on his face like one of those animal trainers who realizes they've gone too far. I told you, he says, none of this is anything. He grabs a dish towel, wipes the grease off my chin, and kisses me down to the floor. Next morning, the mess from last night all over the kitchen, and Burley humming from the bathroom, the pot roast, the dish towel, the spot on the floor with naked us rubbed into it. I think about asking Burley now to tell me about the gas station. What was the feel of it, I want to say? Who was this guy? Was he bigger than you? Was the coffee hot? Why weren't you burned? I clean everything up and put on a pot of coffee, the smell of it filling the room, the same smell that wasn't anywhere on Burley's shirt. And when Burley comes in and kisses me on the cheek, pulls back and winks at me, I feel a million questions on my tongue, a lion's growl forming in my throat. Thank you.
Very good. And Karen Schaber edited a group of 7 reimagined from Vancouver, British Columbia. Nominated for Pushcart Prize, Best Small Fictions, Best Microfiction, and Weekly Top 20, Top 50. Almost gave you a promotion. Karen, you're up.
Thank you, Paul. This is a flash expiration date. It's something that I just came across again that I didn't even remember about this piece until this week when it was included in the Fiction Kitchen Berlin anthology from years ago. So I'm really happy to revisit this. Expiration date. I remember you, she says, looking right through me. The deserted sky flares into tourmaline blue, ballet slipper pink, and flushed merlot, covering the valley like paint. It is the long, cold season, and the winds swirl, throwing her voice so that it seems to come from somewhere else. I have imagined this moment, ruminated for years about its potential, my heart idling in long-term storage. I purse my lips to speak, but a sound like a pained animal comes out. A shrug is the best I can do to cover my embarrassment. It is the winter solstice festival. Throngs of happy people mill about. I am not one of them. You still living on the island, she asks. Her hair is lush, mahogany colored with undertones of red, plum, and chocolate. I remember it being lighter. It hangs long like a filly's mane. She tosses her head and her hair flips off her face, and I'm having a déjà vu. I recall the same involuntary gesture, watching her from the stern of the canoe. She's in the bow and pulling a J-stroke. Her paddle glides out of the water, clean, no splash. But with each dip, she tosses her head and her hair flips off her face. In my mind's eye, I can see her long tresses gleaming like spun gold in the early morning light as we paddle across the sound to the cabin. But here now, she seems a slight impression of her former self, an unexpected turn. She talks about her cooking show and how the network is taking it in a new direction. I want to take in this moment to have and to hold for the next decade without her, but I don't hear much. I'm wondering about the way she remembers me, as if I have been out of sight, out of mind until this very moment, when I have held her at a constant all these years. It's as if she harbors no emotional attachment. The realization is excruciating. How does she not know, not sense, how intensely I still feel? My stomach winces with vomit. I tell her about my screenplay. It's run in the theater. She's never heard of it, but wishes she had. The moment eclipses as she offers a fond, let's stay in touch. And I am again watching her from behind. I memorize the patterns of whorls and rosettes in her hair. But as she is walking away, I realize that the relationship always had an expiration date, like yogurt. My lips quiver as the fantasy fades and reality rushes in like a gas fire. Thank you.
Very good. Cindy Rosmus is originally from the Ironbound section of Newark, New Jersey. Once voted the unfriendliest city on the planet, and it shows in her writing. She's the editor, art director of the crime fiction webzine Yellow Mama. And
Hey guys, thanks, Paul. I'm going to read something really strange, something like so unlike me, and something that I wrote so many years ago. I'm talking like back in 1989. And it was inspired partly by the movie Amadeus and partly by so many years of being an unpublished writer before I finally hit it big or just was published. It's called Eat the Worm. Mozart showed up late last night while Candy the writer was smashed on tequila. The door was open and Candy heard Mozart shut it behind him and turn the lock. He stopped in the kitchen. When he opened the door to the old fridge, something fell out of the freezer and landed on his foot. Candy heard him kick it across the floor. For a while, Mozart leaned in the doorway, staring at her. He was almost as drunk as she was. His wig was on crooked, and there were stains on his lavender waistcoat. With one hand, he held 2 cans of beer, and with the other, he steadied himself against the bar. Candy tried to get up, but fell back on the couch. She laughed. All the lights were out, but as Mozart came towards her, she realized she could see every detail of the room, from the water spots in the wine glasses to the dust hanging from the radiator. If she wasn't bombed, she could have reread the editor's letter. She curled up her legs so Mozart could sit down. Up close, he looked amused, proud as a parent who was as rambunctious as his child, a parody of himself. His eyes were brilliant, but so bloodshot they made Candy's begin to water. His nose seemed too small for his mouth, which was smeared with lipstick from a weird angle as if he'd been kissed. When he smiled, Mozart had dimples. And he smiled back as he cracked one of the beers. You want a glass? She asked. What for? He said. She shrugged. He cracked the other beer and handed it to her. I'll puke, she said. Keep one foot on the floor, Mozart said, and you won't. As she moved her leg, Candy's robe slid open and the bruise on her thigh was exposed. It was the size and hue of a small eggplant and so ugly that he couldn't keep his eyes off it. Got hit with a bar stool, Candy said before he could ask her about it. Over at McCabe's? She nodded and took a sip of beer. Last week sometime, big Dutch knocked Cobra out of his seat and the stool hit me. Later, some biker bitch said I stole her money off the bar. Mozart shrugged. Try bolting your door. She shrugged. Mozart took his feet off the cocktail table long enough to pick up the editor's letter. Another, he said, but she wouldn't answer. He read it by the light of his face. As he sipped his beer, the can shone silver as the buckles on his shoes. He frowned. Fuckers, Candy said in a hurt voice. Idiots, Mozart corrected her. He was reading it again. How many idiots? She had to count on her fingers. This makes 6. He missed his mouth and the beer spilled. He wiped his face and neck with his sleeve. Candy considered offering him a dishcloth or at least her hair. And even won an award, she cried. Mozart folded 2 corners of the letter down and then the whole thing lengthwise. Congratulations, he said. 9 months they had it, Candy said bitterly. 9 damn months it took them to say they didn't want it? Mozart smiled. Long enough for you to have a baby. Not me. Candy watched as he threw the paper airplane into the kitchen. She wouldn't be surprised if it came back by itself. I don't want a baby. Not even mine. Candy hid her face against the couch. As bombed as she knew she was blushing. When Mozart touched the cold beer to her buttock, she jumped up. He winked and finished the beer in one gulp. Last call, she said. That's what you think, Mozart said from the kitchen. Something else, maybe the ice pops, fell out of the freezer, and once again he kicked it aside. Candy heard him crack another beer. After this, you have to leave, she yelled. Waiting up for Big Dutch? No way. At least I can speak in complete sentences. Get out of here, she said. From behind, Mozart caught her around the neck and rested his chin on top of her head. She trembled. Tears came to her eyes. When she wiped them away, her makeup came off on her hand and she let out a sob. It was the first time she cried since she turned 35, since the unsold stories came back almost all at once, since Big Dutch slugged her. She clung to Mozart's arm and he tightened his hold on her. I failed you, she said finally, when no more tears would come. Bullshit, Mozart said. Now blow your nose. On your sleeve? That's all I have. She sighed. Should I give up? He slapped her wet cheek. And I'm not sorry, he said. I won't give up, I swear. It was a bad joke. Like, how do you load a truck full of dead babies? He wasn't laughing. With a pitchfork? Just don't go, Candy begged. Relax. Mozart leaned against the bar. He looked disgusted, haughty as hell, handsome in spite of the lipstick all over his face. He took small, furious sips of beer and still wouldn't look at her. Candy ran her fingers through her hair, holding it up around her face. She wondered if the black streaks had dried on her cheeks. The robe slipped off one shoulder, but she left it that way. Herr Mozart, she whispered. He grunted. I promise I'll grow up. She let go of her hair. Where's the book? She rubbed her shoulder. Kids are okay, but I prefer grown-ups. All I want is your book. Now Candy looked disgusted. Over on the desk, she said. Mozart covered his face so she wouldn't see him smile, but then he laughed out loud. So I'm a slob, Candy muttered. Beer still in hand, Mozart shoved everything but the typewriter off the desk. When he bent over to sort out the manuscript, Candy realized he wasn't wearing any underwear. She liked the shape of his lavender silk cheeks. He suddenly turned and winked again. Candy crushed the empty can and set it on the cocktail table. Mozart perched on the end of the desk and began reading the manuscript. Now and then he scratched his thigh, and Candy's eyes were forced back to his erection. Then she saw his face. He was smiling. As he turned each page, his smile grew wider. He licked his lips, then pressed them together. He took off his wig and ran his hand through his hair. His hair was as wild as hers, but blonde, the color of Golden's mustard. He chewed his thumbnail. Very slowly, he shook his head. Candy's heart was pounding. Finally, he looked at her. When he spoke, his voice sounded strange. My child, he said, and the words unnerved her like a jab in the back. Outside, she heard motorcycles, but inside there was music. His music. My child, he said now. He laid the manuscript on top of the typewriter and began to inch toward her. She grabbed the empty bottle, but she knew it would never stop him. She wouldn't want it to. They say you get drunker when you eat the worm, she said, backing into the couch. Drunkest, Mozart said, but you beat me to it. He took her chin in his hand. When she let go of the bottle, he smiled. She blinked furiously against the light from his face, which was very close to hers. He suddenly licked her mouth and nose. No, she screamed. That's what they did when I was little. My dad used to do that to my mom. Mozart nodded. I know, he said. I was there. Candy stared. It was her lipstick on his face, the same shade that read in the mouths of the cans. She looked into the darkest and dreamiest of eyes. Last call eyes. A lot to do before she died, she realized now. She was breathing hard. He tickled her ribs so she would laugh, and after a while she did. He laughed with her. She put a finger in each of his dimples. He yanked off her robe. Afterward, she lay in his lap, her face against his thigh. The music grew softer till it was just in his hands. He massaged her earlobe and neck, the back of her head. She didn't want to fall asleep. It was late when she woke up on the floor. The sun was bleach white and shining right in her eyes. She sat up and screamed from the pain in her head. She was out of aspirin, and her rooms were a mess. Thank you.
Very good, Cindy. Bill Temples resides in Watertown, Massachusetts. He's published 5 mystery thriller novels, a novella, and four-story anthologies, in addition to over 220 online short stories. The London Independent Story Prize, Wilderness House Literary Review, Blink Inc., Boston Literary Magazine, and Aerial Chart, to name a few. Phil also likes to dabble in mobile photography. He's a member of Grub Street and the Bagel Bards. You can learn more about Phil by visiting his website at https://temples.com.
Thank you, Paul. Good evening, everybody. I was struggling with what to read here. I was going to read a few passages from a novel I'm working on, but I think instead I'll go with a short story, which I don't believe I've read here before. It's entitled Fight Night. There's a good crowd for the fight tonight. Cars and pickup trucks line the long drive from the main road up to my barn. By the looks of it, I'd say we got close to 80 people in attendance. Most of them's put up bets for the winner. My oldest son, Kenny, keeps track of admission and the cash wagers while I mingle with the crowd and greet everyone. My wife, Mabel, and the 2 daughters, Priscilla and Josephine, handle the concessions. I spent a bit of upfront money to set things up, but it's a profitable little gig and it complements what the ranch pulls in. A few of the town folk started to fuss a couple of months ago about our dino fight nights and our betting. One even went so far as to contact Sheriff Bud Wesley to file an official complaint. Bud happens to be a stand-up guy. He's also my second cousin. Shortly after the complaint, Bud came out to one of our fights and pronounced that there was no violation that he could see. He told that nosy body that there were no statutes on the books in either Hot Springs County or the state of Wyoming against it. Cockfighting? Sure. Dogfighting? You betcha. But nobody ever heard of a law against betting on dinosaur fighting, probably because there haven't been any living dinosaurs around these parts for the last 16 million years. This portion of Wyoming is thick with dinosaur bones. I read somewhere that we got over 500 million years worth of them. Wyoming used to be under an inland sea during the Triassic Age. It shrank, turning the whole area into a coastal plain. At least that's what the scientists say. And we've got our Wyoming Dinosaur Center right here in Thermopolis. There are all sorts of digs in the county that folks can visit that are within easy driving distance. Next to the cattle and sheep ranching, dino tourism is probably the biggest business we got in these parts. My dinosaur supplier is Leroy Hennessy down on Mossy Creek Road. He's a clever guy and a real schemer. As long as I've known Leroy, he's been involved in some business scheme or another, some better than others. I still recall him getting me involved in his farm equipment pyramid scheme. He called it Agaway, said it was based on the Amway model. Well, I didn't find out what that meant until I'd sunk several $1,000s of my hard-earned money into buying products off of him that I couldn't move. For the longest time, Mabel didn't let me live that one down. This time, though, things are different. This dino fight project is already turning a small profit. With any luck, it might help me put the kids through college. The other day, when Leroy was delivering a couple of young Allosauruses, I asked him, "How you getting all these dinosaurs anyway?" I just figured Leroy was acting as the middleman for some shady scientific lab somewhere that was cloning them, like they did in that movie Jurassic Park. If I told you, Dan, you wouldn't believe me. Well, try me. He thought about it for a moment, then he shrugged his shoulders. Then he proceeds to tell me this cockamamie story that there's some kind of time portal located on his property. When a person crosses through the portal, they're transported back tens, even hundreds of millions of years into the past. Leroy goes on dinosaur hunts regularly with his brother and a few other trusted hands and brings back juveniles through the portal. I'm not sure I completely believe Leroy, but he seems sincere. I thought for sure the dinosaurs were being grown by scientists. Guess it don't much matter how much he gets them, so long as he's a reliable supplier. Tonight's fight is shaping up to be one of our most successful evenings. The beer sales are high and the betting is higher than usual. The house, that'd be me of course, gets a nice percentage of the wagers. I try to bring the excitement to a fever pitch for the final match without letting things get too out of control. For tonight's extravaganza, I'm pitting a young Allosaurus named Alley Oop in a fight against a juvenile Carcharodontosaurus named Karchi the Devil Dino. Some of the guys in the front row are getting a little rowdy. "Come on, you scrawny little piece of shit. Rip his throat out," shouts one guy. "Look at that chicken shit dino." "You're no devil. Go back and suck on your mommy's hind teat, Karchi." Both species are apex predators, but it looks like Alley Oop is having his way with the devil. The Carcharodontosaurus is clearly outmatched. Karchi is sporting a big gash near his throat. He's on his last legs and staggers to maintain his balance as blood streams from the wound. I nod to one of my ranch hands, Pedro, to end the fight. Alley Oop is declared the victor. Then Pedro and another hired hand lasso Alley Oop and they drag him away to his cage. He's only half as big as a man, but he puts up one hell of a struggle. As Kenny begins to distribute the winning proceeds, I walk down to get a closer look at Karchi, but not too close. He's lying on his side in a pool of his own blood. When he sees me, he turns his head in my general direction and starts snapping his jaws menacingly. Looks like he's done for. I see my wife and child standing off to the side. Mabel knows what comes next. She shields our youngest's eyes with her hand. Then I pull out my pistol, and without hesitation, I put 2 slugs in the dinosaur's head. A cheer goes up from the crowd. I don't relish putting down the critter no matter how primitive he is, but it's the humane thing to do. I guess it was too good to last. Some animal-loving wackos from out of town snuck into one of our fight nights. I remember seeing them. They were a couple of 20-something kids. They didn't look like they fit in. I didn't think much about it at the time, seeing as how we were getting popular by word of mouth and starting to draw in folks from outside the county. Those PETA folks, PETA kids, secretly took videos of the fight and sent them back to their PETA headquarters. Next thing you know, the federales come around and shut us down. They confiscated my 13 dinos, plus the dinosaur remains I had buried on the property. The feds also wiretapped my phone, so they knew about Leroy. They raided Leroy's place and discovered his time portal. They seized all of his property and adjoining farms by eminent domain, national security or some such bullshit. Threw him into jail without due process, too. I received a stern warning from the U.S. District Attorney and was let off scot-free after agreeing to sign a non-disclosure agreement. What can I say? I got taken in again by Leroy and one of his schemes. This time I'm only out about 15 grand. Not as bad as the Agaway fiasco, but at least I managed to stay out of jail. Mabel's never going to let me live this down. Thank you.
Paul, again, I think Patricia's trying to get back in. I think she got kicked out. So if you would let her back in.
See anybody at the door? You still see her?
Oh yeah, I don't think she was able to. I think something happened with her computer, so don't worry about it.
Okay. Our next reader is Andrea Marcusa. Her works appeared in Gettysburg Review, Cutbank, River Styx, River Teeth, Citron Review, and others. She received recognition in a range of competitions, including Glimmer Train, Raleigh Review, New Letters, and Southampton Review. Andrea.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Paul. It's great to see everyone tonight. Let's see, I'm going to read two really short pieces. So the first one is called Disquiet. Okay. Sometimes when I'm engrossed in a book, the sun streams through the window and brightens the pages, startling me. I blink, notice the minute flecks of dust dancing on its beam, and the cold January day outside is transformed by a moment of light. In the adjacent room, my husband is consumed with his culinary alchemy, sauteing garlic, grating ginger, deftly slicing vegetables for a stir fry. It is during such moments that the depth of my need for him become vividly apparent. I know we are here for a lifetime, yet our days together feel more fleeting than ever. It took almost losing him for me to grasp the steep cost of love. His voice calls out, announcing that lunch will be ready in 20 minutes. His industry and enthusiasm offer me a comforting sense of security. There's a gusto and zest about him, a zeal that's been absent for years, and it fills me with a warmth that's hard to describe. I want to drink up every moment of our lives together, savor it like a slow melting sweet lozenge. But I always feel the other two looming, like the relentless ticking of the clock on the wall. That knowledge that at any moment our lives could vanish, like that day the fire smoke descended upon us from up north and transformed the sunniest, longest day of the year to twilight. The next one is called Refuge. The waves curl and crash, each one similar, but like snowflakes, none are alike. The summer unfolds with promise, Gulls feast on clams and dive for fish. The salt air fills with children's cries of gleam upon feeling once again wet sand oozing through their toes. The plovers nest, protected. My tomato plants, already reaching past my knees, bow under the weight of young fruit, which will expand and soon ripen for picking and savoring. Its flesh a deep red, its taste like summer itself. Despite my joy, I mourn for what will not return this year. The snack bar, splintering deck, lobster rolls heavy with claw meat and buns toasted golden, and homemade ice cream sandwiches, sweet and creamy. The shortcut to the beach behind the Andersons' house and down the shaky set of wooden stairs to the end. Sand, a route I know so well I can navigate it in the dark, is now blocked by a thick metal chain and a no trespassing sign. How good s'mores used to taste. My mother's love of fireworks. My mother. How do I find a way to color what's gone with fresh paints of rose, sky, blue, and daffodil? Line past the surfers, far out at the breaks, scanning the water for the evening's perfect wave, and notice the scattering of broken shells sparkling in the sunset's slanting rays. Retracing my steps, heading towards home. The dusk has turned the sky inky. A crescent moon rises at the edge of the world. Sorry. As I stride past homes and hedges, I spot them. Fireflies have suddenly arrived for the season, unexpectedly, like they always do, and all at once, on this late June eve, their golden tails glowing on, then off in a graceful staccato. As they dart here and there, finding their way into this early summer world, they seem to signal me to follow, their tiny but sturdy lamps lighting my way through the dark. Thank you.
Our next reader is Juan Pablo Mobili. He was born in Buenos Aires and adopted by New York. His poems appeared in the American Journal of Poetry, Hanging Loose Press, and the Patterson Literary Review, amongst others. As in many publications in Europe, Asia, Latin America, and Australia. He's a recipient of several Pushcart Prize and Best of the Net nominations, and his chapbook, Contraband, was published in 2022. Most recently, he was the guest editor of the spring 2023 issue of the Banyan Review. Juan.
Paul, I'm sorry. I think Juan sent me a message. He said he had to leave. He had a medical procedure this week and he's not as recovered as I wish. Apologies to all. So.
Okay.
He had to leave.
Well, let's wish him well then. Dee Sesling is our next reader. And since I don't have a bio for you, he runs a very good magazine called 10 by 10. And you have a new book out. Yes, you are talking to me. You have to mute, unmute.
Talking about me, Paul?
Do and about.
Okay. Okay, I don't know what happened. I got cut off completely and then managed to get back in. So I'm just gonna read, I'm gonna read one story from my book, Secret Behind the Gate. It's called Hitman. I sit sipping tequila with my friend Pascal Pagenaud. Pascal says he's a hitman. Over a drink at Sparky's bar, Pascal asks, "You know the dictator in Latin America who was shot between the eyes at his inauguration?" I nod yes, and he touches his thumb to his chest. That was me. And the TV executive whose car went off the bridge. Again, I nod, and again his thumb touches his chest. Then he thumbs himself twice more. Gaetano Fabriazzo, Jack Dobin, he says proudly. The mafia boss and the actor? I ask in disbelief. He nods up and down quickly. Both of them, as well as Basil Benson, the basketball star who shaved points, and Maria stars of the movie star, he adds. I can't believe it. I thought Benson just fell off the roof of his buddy's house and stars overdosed. Yes, that's true, he says. Benson did fall off the roof of his buddy's building, but with some help. As for Miss Starza, too many pills with her drugs. Her downfall is at the very well-known restaurant. When she goes to the bathroom, those pills somehow find their way into her drink. It's amazing, I say. You actually knock off all these famous people and never get caught? He finishes his drink with a large gulp, holds up his glass to the bartender for a refill. The famous, the infamous, the not famous, and the wannabe famous, he says with a smile. I'm good at what I do, so people seek me out to do it. Crime bosses want to eliminate rivals. Corporations want to terminate CEOs. Husbands want to delete wives. Wives want husbands to disappear and never come home. Once I did a husband and a wife. Each paid me, so I do them both in. You're kidding. No, I'm a professional. I never kid about my work. Not ever. But right now, I'm going to a movie, The Murder Mystery at the Rialto. That's it. Thank you.
Gloria, are you going to read tonight?
No, I'm just going to listen tonight. Thank you.
Okay, checking in. Did I miss anyone? No? Just Brad waving?
I think you missed me, but I completely understand.
A vote.
I'm sorry.
It was a vote.
Okay. Plus, I don't have any biography.
Me either.
Okay, I'm going to read a couple of short ones. That's okay.
Sure.
First of all, I want to say that after each person reads, I think I want to write like that person. So after I leave here, I've got like 12 people I have to emulate. Anyway, first one I'm going to read, it's called Aperitif. After anger management class, I sent out some anonymous shenanigans just to get the ball rolling. To be honest, I like grading my own homework. Professor Lightbulb says the key to charming personality is to pick up the tab for the entire bar, but who can afford to drink like that on a weekday? For the past few months, I've been doing all the right things wrong, for health reasons. Evidently, you can have too much of a good thing. Little Buster, my favorite second cousin, says a good suit has a sacred place in every man's wardrobe. He says Franz Hals loved the Arrow Color Man, but I prefer to party in my lime green Tanqueray t-shirt and my yellow devil flip-flops. I love the feel of the wind in my hair and the 180-degree angle of a plunging credit score. Of course, Adam Smith, the first economist in the Bible, said, "Mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent." So I hope God doesn't send any more of those plagues to Kansas and point south. When you think about it, pestilence is inefficient for killing innocent people who've been made in your own image. A stake through the heart or solar-powered electrocution would be more cost-effective. Care for another aperitif? Lucky winner. Never run out of conversation starters. Of course, everything ends in the middle of something else that hasn't yet ended. But my synesthesia tells me that before I know it, I'm going to be a lucky winner. Isn't that the most beautiful music you've ever seen? It may be just the camel's nose under the tent, but why wake up the spiders between seances? It's a preventable tragedy, not least because of the anticipated cash infusion. I can't wait till I get it out of my system. Although come hell or high water, you've got to have a backup plan. That's why great minds think alike is my slogan. Forget about those clairvoyant Barbie twins in Boise. They didn't mean a thing to me. I'm crazy about you, baby, even when I look at you with my good eye. And the last piece, it's quite tiny. It's called Dolls. Oh, it's from my book, Lucky Animals. Okay, which is on Amazon. Dolls. Over the years, my house grew to be as big as a house. It's not an either-or question. Needless to say, there is safety in numbers and letters. Yesterday, Margene asked me, "Are you as disappointed in baggy, slouchy trousers as I am?" Then it rained. I drove out to the doll cemetery, the one next to the toy lake. Fortunately, there were no survivors. Thank you.
Folks, that was a good reading tonight. Thank you all.
Thanks, Paul.
See you next month. Fall early, get in early. Yes, Karen. Oh, fine. A really good group. Thank you.
Well, thanks for putting this together. If people hang around long enough, I'll start reading again. So you've been warned.